Hello and welcome back to another Team ContiBreak video. We are here today at Honored's Ground Aglio to bring another Stoicheia deck profile number 2 or number 1. The Magnolia deck, Sylvan Horned Beasts. So before we explain this particular deck build, I would like to explain that there are two variations of Magnolia builds. The first variation is the standard one that you see in most deck profiles, which is the one that relies mostly on executing the Magnolia Persona Ride combo. So that one relies on a lot of draws, a lot of setup in order to activate a one big turn burst against the enemy player. The other variation that we will be talking about today is the one on the video, the rush variation of Magnolia, which doesn't necessarily require the usage of a Persona Ride, since all of your power is drawn from the early game rush. So the win condition for this particular deck is that you push your opponent to 3 or 4 damage before they ride grade 3. Which after playing about 10 games across 2 tournaments is a very standard thing to do. It's extremely common if you know how to play your deck. So the strength of this deck is that as a rush deck with a very reliable win condition, you are able to win against any deck, even control decks, even against Prison or Barra Magnus, as long as you have good pieces or decent pieces in the early game and execute the early game rush, which is very true for all early game rush decks. The biggest weakness that this deck has is that it's very reliant on pieces, on cards, to be at the right place and at the right time. So if you're not able to get all of these some of these key pieces, then you're practically screwed early on. Although that's not really a very common case, especially since you don't need to, since the new Mulligan doesn't require you to get a 1, 2, 3 for the ride. You can get all the cards you need. You have 10 chances to draw just 1 or 2 key pieces to enable the early game rush. So it's pretty easy. As mentioned, the win con is pushing your opponent to 3 or 4 damage before they ride grade 3. Let's now move on to the deck build, starting with the ride deck. So our ride deck is the Sylvan Horned Beast Ride Chain, which specializes itself in superior calling units to the battlefield or adding cards to your hand sometimes. As mentioned, this rush deck, you need as many rear guards as you can placed on the field. You need a full field at grade 2, and you'll know why later. Some deck builds like to use the Zorga Ride Chain, the one which allows you to draw and pick up orders, so that you can get the Persona Ride Magnolia early on, even if you don't get it in the Mulligan. But as I said before, you don't need the second copy of the Magnolia. You want it, but it's not a requirement in this deck. You can finish off your opponents even if you're stuck at grade 3. 4 attacks is enough to deal devastating damage to your opponent and eventually finish them off, thanks to the build of this deck. If you want to change the deck build, you can add that, but this deck doesn't have a lot of order cards, so you'll just be discarding 2 anyway, so there's no plus there. So that's it for our ride chain, our ride deck. For our grade 3s, we have 3 Magnolias. Sylvan Horned Beast Magnolia, you want this card to enable your persona ride, even though it's not necessary that you get them. You still want them because it's a good finisher. It's one of the strongest finishers in the game right now, and once you get that persona ride, the game is practically over. So you want 3 of them to maximize drawing them early on. You only have 3 grade 3s, the Magnolia. Moving on, we have our grade 2s, the key card and star of this deck, Sylvan Horned Beast Junozla. Junozla is a very strong card since it transfers its own power to another unit anywhere, as long as it's in the back row, attacking from the back row. So this is your key card. This is one of the cards that you definitely need during your Magnolia turns. All your triggers go to this unit, and you want 4 so that you can enable the rush later on. Next up, very special card that most decks probably don't have, Sylvan Horned Beast Duger. Why did I put Duger? Because Duger is a 15k attacker by itself. During a grade 2 turn, that's automatically a 10 guard. During a grade 3 turn, it makes for an excellent front row attacker so that it will reach the magic number. So during your Magnolia turns, you want Duger in the front row to be dealing at least 5 guard, forcing an intercept or at least 1 card from hand. So I put 4 because I want to be able to make sure that my early game rush is at least 15k attack or 15k shield attacks, so that the opponent will be forced to guard with 15 guard, or in case they get a defensive trigger, they will still have to guard the attack. It will still be enough to hit the opponent. Next up, we have 2 Lattice. This card is very Soul Blast heavy. The reason why I put Lattice is because I usually don't activate the Persona Ride of Magnolia. So the only back row attacker I have is Junozla, which is the priority. You shouldn't be using Lattice, even though it's a 15k guard, that's just 1 trigger. Having Junozla allows one of your lanes to get bigger without the same cost, the Soul Blast. So Lattice is not an excellent front row attacker, but it's still good if you get the Persona right turn. So still put 2, just in case. For our final grade 2 units, we have Sylvan Horned Beast Aglio. Aglio is a good card to have in this deck because it pumps Junozla and increases the power for the final turn. Some people like to add Ilinia instead, so Ilinia's ability is Counter Blast 1, Soul Blast 1 to Superior Call 1 from drop zone and give it +5. I personally don't like Ilinia in this deck because as a rush deck, your opponent won't give you as much resource as you want, since they'll be too busy trying to control your field by attacking your rear guard. So you don't get a lot of Counter Blast. You'll usually just get 2 Counter Blast, and for that 2 Counter Blast, that's for Magnolia and Junozla. Adding a 3rd Counter Blast, well, let's just say pretty hard to manage resource-wise, unless you're planning to put tearful malice in your order. I usually don't use Aglio's ability unless it's a really secure, unless to really secure my final turn, and I'm sure that the opponent will finish me off regardless of the outcome of my turn. So most of the time, Aglio's just there to be a front row attacker, 20k attacker in case of a Persona Ride, or just 10k during the rush. For my grade 2 order cards, I have Ghost Chase. Ghost Chase allows me to be confident about my early game rush because I have Duger. I really need to put 5 cards on the field, 5 rear guards on the field. You don't really get to use that, but you don't really activate that by just putting any card on your field. You still want boosters on your back row. As boosters, I like to place my sentinels or my triggers on the back row just to force out the 5k rear guards. Since I have Ghost Chase, I'm confident that I will be able to return them on a later turn, recycle them when my hand cards get a little bit better. So yeah, you should have this card. If you're running Call of the Beast, you should remove that. It's a very bad card. Even though it's 15k shield, it usually gets countered by a lot of decks like Prison, Dragon Empire, Barry Magnus. Just a dead card. This card does the same thing, but it has more practical uses. And finally, one Tearful Malice. The Tearful Malice allows me to recycle some resources like Counter Blast or Counter Charge. The cost is pretty heavy. Retiring 2 rear guards. So use this only when you really want to deal a lot of damage to your opponent, such as during your final turn, or if you think that you can push them to the point that they won't be able to recover from the game. Moving on to our grade 1s. Of course, we have Planar Protect Dragon. This card, Sentinel, the single R Sentinel, not from the trial deck because of this special ability that you can guard from. If even you don't need to discard if you have at least, I mean, 1 or less cards in your hand. Next up, another surprise for this deck is Knight of Friendship Cyrus. Cyrus enables the early game rush by superior calling 1 unit to the field, unless it's an order card. So I know that Cyrus is Soul Blast 2, very heavy cost. A lot of players are turned off by the idea of having Cyrus in the deck because it requires a bit more resource management, which they can use for Lattice. Soul Blast for Lattice on a bigger turn, but as mentioned before, you really don't need Lattice, so you have some allowance to use Cyrus to get a free card on the field immediately. Another grade 1 that you want to have is Charis. Charis is a 10k back row attacker. 10k is an awkward guard in D. So since cards grade 1s are 5k shields, and grade 0s are 15k shields, there's really no getting around to managing that extra 5 unless the opponent is willing to guard with 2 cards in hand, double intercept, or just waste the 5k shield from the 15k just to guard that. And finally, for our grade 1, as replacement for Ilinia, I don't like Ilinia because of the counter blast, but I still like putting rear guards from drop zone to the rear guard circle, so I use Spiritual Body Condensation. So it essentially does the same thing as Ilinia, except there's no counter blast. It's just a soul blast, superior call 1 from drop zone and give it +5. Yeah, very good card. For my triggers, I'm running 7 crits, 4 draw, 4 heal, and 1 overtrigger, of course. So 7 crits because there are times that you won't be able to superior call units to rear guard circle, especially on grade 1 turns. So having 7 crits really helps you push the opponent to a point that you want in the game. Sometimes at the point they ride grade 3, they are already 5 damage if you are able to crit consistently. Fronts, decks are very dependent on having a full field. There will be very terrible times where you won't be able to superior call units or get a full field or even get Duger's +5 ability, so a front trigger won't get optimized. Most of the time you really don't need the front trigger because all your power draws from the back row. For my overtrigger, I have the Stoicheia overtrigger, which has all the trigger abilities that you can activate once you check it, drive check it. You can also use the Cray Elemental trigger if you want 100 million attacks. But in my case, I prefer having crits and the defensive option of the heal, as well as having more draws so that I can get key cards for a later turn. Even if you get drive check this overtrigger on your grade 1 turn, you won't feel too bad because you draw two cards and get the crit. So that secures you a big advantage. If you drive check the Cray Elemental on your grade 1 turn, then there's no advantage, just the draw, and you'll feel really terrible. That's pretty much our deck build. So after our deck build, let's talk about the Mulligan. So for our Mulligan, there are 3 cards that you want to have in your Mulligan. That is, of course, the grade 3 Magnolia. You want to have at least 1 in your hand. Most often 1 is enough. You don't want more than 1 because you want to enable the early game rush. So if you have more during your starting hand, you can place the others back to the deck. As mentioned before, this deck isn't really reliant on having a Persona ride, but if you have it, when you get it on your Mulligan, then that's a pretty big advantage, and you can, most of the time, 80% of the time, once you push them to 3 or 4 damage before grade 3, you win the game. The other card that you want to have in your Mulligan is Sylvan Hornbeast Junosla. You want to have this card in your starting hand because it allows you to set up your potential final field, which is having one of these in the back row. When you have one of these in the back row, your turns will start hurting. Next up, we have Knight of Friendship Cyrus. Cyrus should be present before you ride your grade 3. So on your grade 2 turn, you will be able to use Cyrus abilities to superior call another one, which essentially activates the rush, giving you an easy 5 rear guard field combo. Just 1 is enough. You can have more Cyrus if you're fighting a Barry Magnus deck. You can save this in your hand until the later stages of the game if you're afraid that the game will reach the point where Barry Magnus will reach 15 soul and just eat up your field. Aside from these 3, you want as many rear guards as you want in your hand. Doesn't matter if they're grade 1 or grade 2. Sentinels, not so much. You can return them to the deck. You want rear guards that can actually attack, so return it. You may also want to have Dugers in the starting hand. Order triggers, you don't want them aside from Ghost Chase maybe. So that's it for our Mulligan. Let's talk about the best combos in the deck. So one of the combos in the deck is the early game rush. For the early game rush, you just need these cards. You just need to ride Lattice. Once you ride Lattice, you'll be able to superior call 1 card. Doesn't matter what card you superior call. So assuming you superior call Aglio, that's 2 cards in your field already. Next up, you normal call your Cyrus, superior call it there, or if you want to wish that if you were trying to plan to get a Duger, then you can put it there using its abilities to Soul Blast 2, Soul Blasting 2, which is the right chain. You can superior call 1 card from the deck. Let's say that's the card you superior called, or let's just say you have Duger in hand. You superior call this, put this on the rear guard circle here to push that to push your agenda. You call as many cards in your hand as possible, doesn't matter what, as long as you get 5 full fields. At this point, you'll ensure at least 2 damage from your opponent, not including the triggers or if they guard. If they don't guard, if they can't guard this attack, then that puts them immediately at 3. If they can't guard and you get a crit, then that puts them at 4 on your grade 2 turn. So that's for our grade 2 rush. Just attack them using everything that you have. So for your grade 3 combo, you want to have something like this. So let's assume that you have 2 damage. So that's your combo. Attacking, you have these cards to ensure that you have a 15k lane. Attacking with Magnolia, 13k attack. Twin Drive, you give all effects to Junozda. Junozda attacks, giving all effects to the unit that gives the most awkward number. When you're giving power in the overdress, you shouldn't think about which lane becomes bigger. You should think about which power lane will have the most awkward guard. The awkwardness of guarding in overdress is really important because of the changes in the guarding system in the shield values of the cards. Since grade 1s no longer gives 10k shields and trigger units are 15k shields, it's very hard to guard a 10k guard attack without wasting the potential of your cards. So if you get a 10k or a 20k shield, then they'll be forced to guard with 2 cards. Or if it's just a 10k and they guard with the trigger, then they wasted 5 guard. So keep in mind, keep it awkward. Big isn't necessarily better. So yeah, it will really help you when on your final turn. When you persona ride, you just ensure that you have at least 2 of these cards, 2 Junozdas. If you have 3, then that's better. Assuming you have 3 counter blast, you can finish off your opponent during this turn because Junozda will keep stacking power by giving it, transferring it to the next Junozda, eventually reaching the smallest unit or the most awkward number. But even though I say that you should keep the numbers awkward, you shouldn't leave something like a 5 guard, or in this case, this is a 25 guard. That's not awkward, that's 15k guard, that's just 1 shield. Maybe you can give the power to him after you transfer bounce, bounce, bounce. Attacking with this is a 32k lane. Now that's a good number because that's an awkward number, 33. There's no way to guard that. That's using just 2 cards, except if they're trying to waste another card, unless you're one of those decks that really have the 10k shields. So that's it for our Sylvan Horned Beast Magnolia deck profile. If you like our video, please like and subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. Again, if you're looking for any decks in the overdress meta or any deck in particular, we have it at Honors Ground Aglio on our eBay shop or on our Facebook page. You can search us using the links that we have in the description. So once again, see you guys on the next video. Bye bye.